Max Verstappen, the four-time world champion, finished 17th in FP1 at Interlagos. Yes, 17th. Just days before a critical sprint weekend, Red Bull looked completely lost. Fans started asking, what on earth is happening to the RB21? Meanwhile, Yuki Tsunoda, Verstappen's new teammate, crashed early in the session and later ran a nearly identical setup. What he experienced inside that car left even the paddock stunned, and it may have revealed the truth behind Red Bull's shocking fall from pace. What Tsunoda discovered wasn't illegal. It wasn't sabotage. It was something far more troubling: a setup philosophy so aggressive, only Max Verstappen could tame it. And in Brazil, it finally bit back. From a disastrous soft tire gamble to a radical mid-session setup overhaul, Verstappen's car became virtually undrivable. But this chaos might not be the end, it could be the reset. Verstappen needs to turn Brazil around. Here's what really happened. Before I tell you all the information that came out in the last few hours, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any information. Max Verstappen in P17. No, that's not a typo. That's how Friday began for the reigning world champion at the 2025 Brazilian Grand Prix. Just minutes into FP1, Verstappen was visibly fighting the car oversteer, unpredictability, zero traction out of turn 4. It was a rare sight, the most complete driver in the sport, trying to make sense of a setup that looked fast on paper but fell apart on track. Fans were confused. Engineers were quiet. But one person had an up-close look inside that setup: Yuki Tsunoda. Tsunoda, now Verstappen's teammate after Red Bull's shock mid-season reshuffle, experienced nearly the same configuration in FP1 right before crashing out. His feedback? Brutal. It felt like the car was on ice, he told his engineer. His sector data backed it up. Lateral grip dropped dramatically in sectors 1 and 3, and his steering corrections were off the charts. Tsunoda wasn't just guessing, it was confirmation that the RB21 had been pushed too far. The car wasn't broken. It was over-optimized. And that's when the spotlight swung back to Verstappen. Because if two drivers are struggling in the same machine, why is only one able to bring it back under control? Tsunoda, despite his raw speed, simply couldn't adapt. Verstappen, on the other hand, requested a differential change, softened the rear slightly, and found nearly 6/10 by the final run even on the same tires. It wasn't perfect, but it was calculated. That's Verstappen's brilliance. He's not just fast. He's technically fearless. According to internal sources, Red Bull was trialing a radical new floor stiffness setting, one that increased downforce under vertical load but made corner entry twitchy. It was the kind of gamble only someone like Verstappen could evaluate without spinning. Tsunoda found out the hard way. His off in turn 7 ended his session, but it also confirmed something critical: the RB21, in this configuration, only works with absolute control. There's no margin for error. This isn't about blaming the car. It's about understanding Verstappen's limit-seeking mindset. Red Bull is building around him in ways no other team dares. While other drivers are handed balance, Verstappen is handed risk. He tests what's possible. And when it backfires like it did here in Interlagos, it's not failure. It's feedback. Valuable, brutal feedback that shapes how Red Bull prepares for the sprint race and qualifying ahead. So what did Tsunoda really discover in Verstappen's car? Not favoritism. Not a secret mode. He discovered what it takes to drive like Max: commitment, clarity, and a total absence of fear when the grip falls away. That's what separates great drivers from the generational ones. Verstappen isn't struggling, he's testing the limit of the entire Red Bull concept. And now, heading into the most chaotic weekend of the season, he knows exactly where that limit is. Max Verstappen's influence inside Red Bull isn't just cultural, it's architectural. Since 2021, every major development in their chassis philosophy has been filtered through one key variable: can Max handle it? He thrives on front-end sharpness, rear-end unpredictability, and low-rake, high-load setups that would scare off half the grid. What happened in Brazil wasn't a setup mistake, it was an intentional push into extreme territory. Because Verstappen doesn't build comfort. He builds peak performance under pressure. At Interlagos, the RB21 was running an experimental rear suspension mapping, designed to delay weight transfer under braking while preserving rotation through medium-speed corners. On paper, this should have given Verstappen faster exits in Sector 2. But it came at a cost: instability into Turn 1, erratic feedback over curbs, and violent snap oversteer when energy loaded too quickly into the floor. Verstappen's response? Keep it. He didn't ask to revert. He asked to adapt. This is where Verstappen separates himself from the field. Most drivers would reject such a setup, immediately sacrificing a few tenths for a more stable platform. But Max wants the edge. He tests the danger zone, learns its language, and then finds time others can't. His car isn't easier. It's harder. Because Verstappen knows that if he can tame something nobody else can, the advantage is permanent. And that's what this FP1 was about: information acquisition at the limit. Yuki Tsunoda couldn't survive it. His crash wasn't clumsy, it was predictable. The RB21, in this form, is not made for the average driver. It demands split-second corrections, total faith in rear traction recovery, and a near telepathic understanding of balance shift. Verstappen has that. Tsunoda, still learning, does not. And in that contrast, the Red Bull engineers saw the data they needed. This package is Verstappen's alone. Behind the scenes, Red Bull is already tuning the sprint setup based on Max's inputs. The aero team is reviewing underfloor pressure deltas. The ride height calibration is being narrowed, likely reducing some of the suspension aggression to create a wider performance window, but only slightly. Because Verstappen doesn't want safe. He wants fast. He wants decisive grip, even if it's only available to him. This is the engineering paradox of Red Bull racing in 2025. Build a car that only Max Verstappen can drive. And that's not arrogance, it's strategy. Because if he can handle it, no one else needs to. And that's why Tsunoda's crash wasn't a problem, it was proof. Proof that the RB21 is being sculpted for a singular purpose: to keep Verstappen untouchable when it matters most. For Yuki Tsunoda, the Brazilian Grand Prix was never going to be simple. But what he discovered inside the RB21 made things brutally clear. He's not just racing beside Max Verstappen, he's driving a car built for Max Verstappen. That's not a lack of support. That's reality inside a team designed around excellence. Tsunoda found out, in the hardest way possible, that in this garage, there is no room for hesitation. The moment his car snapped loose through Turn 7, the message was written on the telemetry. The setup, while legal, balanced in theory, and razor-sharp on Verstappen's inputs, was undrivable for a second driver still learning the margins of Red Bull machinery. It's not that Tsunoda lacked courage. It's that the car didn't forgive imprecision. The RB21 wasn't flawed. It was feral. And Verstappen is the only one who can tame it without crashing. Inside the team, there's no panic. Red Bull knew the risks of the setup they assigned to both drivers. But they needed Tsunoda to try it, to validate that it truly only fits Max's style. The consequence? Confirmation. Tsunoda's incident wasn't failure, it was data. Data that proved Verstappen's driving approach is so aggressive, so delicately calibrated, that even the slightest deviation turns control into chaos. And that's exactly why Red Bull continues to trust Max with more freedom than any other driver on the grid. This dynamic creates pressure not for Max, but for everyone around him. Engineers must now develop parts that fit one man's instincts. Strategists must plan races around Verstappen's ability to stretch tires, manipulate pace, and mask weaknesses. And Tsunoda? He must learn fast, or accept that this isn't his team. That's not personal. It's structural. Red Bull has always backed the driver who delivers the sharpest results, and Max Verstappen continues to deliver clarity lap after lap. But the emotional toll is real. Tsunoda is not a placeholder, he's a Grand Prix caliber talent who's earned this seat. But now, he's experiencing the brutal ceiling that Red Bull's engineering evolution creates. Verstappen isn't just fast. He's redefining how far a team can push performance when built around one driver. And as that car evolves deeper into Verstappen's image, the harder it becomes for anyone else to match his tempo. Still, this moment is not a fracture, it's a filter. Red Bull doesn't care about equal machinery. They care about titles. And Verstappen, even with a P17 on the board, is closer to that goal than anyone else. What Tsunoda discovered wasn't a weakness. It was the price of chasing perfection in a world where only one man can hold the steering wheel steady. And Red Bull is fine with that because they already know exactly who that man is. Max Verstappen didn't overreact after FP1. He didn't need to. Speaking to media later in the day, his words were simple: the balance wasn't great, but we're trying things. Some of it worked, some didn't, but that's what Fridays are for. That's Verstappen in a nutshell. No excuses. No panic. Just relentless analysis. Even when the session looks like a disaster on paper, he's already 3 steps ahead, processing what others haven't yet seen. Yuki Tsunoda, for his part, was humble and honest. The car felt really tricky, more than I expected. I didn't put it together, he admitted. It wasn't frustration. It was clarity. Tsunoda is smart enough to know this isn't about talent, it's about adaptation. What he felt in that car wasn't a generic setup gone wrong. It was Verstappen's razor-wire baseline. And mastering it requires more than bravery. It demands fluency in how Red Bull thinks, builds, and pushes limits. Red Bull Racing released no major statement. They didn't need to. Internally, they've already shifted direction for the sprint race. Expect to see a slightly revised rear floor on Verstappen's car, a softened front ride height range, and tighter control over brake migration settings. Not to calm things down, but to refine the weapon Verstappen was wielding with half a grip. Because if Max found 6/10 in that chaos, imagine what happens when the setup sings. For Tsunoda, this weekend may feel like a wall, but it could be a window. If he absorbs the lesson behind Verstappen's control, not just the speed, but the adaptability, he might unlock a new version of himself. But if not, Red Bull's pecking order will only harden. That's how this team works, zero room for anything but the sharpest edge. What we're witnessing isn't a slump. It's a system stress test. Red Bull is building next year's title platform in real time, inside a practice session, around a driver who thrives in controlled chaos. Verstappen doesn't fear setbacks. He uses them. He bends the data, reshapes the car, and shows the factory exactly where the next 10th lives. That's why he's not just dominant. He's inevitable.